welcome to Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast, with your host, Buddy Sotelo Esquire, effervescent Evan Ginsberg, and wrestling's premier photographer, Mike Leno. But our guest tonight, Evan, would you like to introduce him?
Sure. Colin Hunter is the founder of Kayfabe News. He's written thousands of pieces for that site. Great comic mind. And also he's created the film The Ref Didn't See It, a documentary on refs, the appropriately named The Ref Didn't See It. And we've all watched the film, so excellent wrestling documentary. I would certainly put it in my top 10 of all-time wrestling documentaries, because not only, I mean it sincerely, I'm not just saying it because you're on the show. It's from the heart, it's funny, and it's just very entertaining.
And it's extremely well produced. It's a very polished and watchable, documentary.
It's well edited. The music bed underneath is great. It's funny, appropriate. If I could just say some really quick stuff. One guy was hoping you would interview, and he's actually in your film, but he's like running up the ramp or something like that, was Johnny Bravo, who's like the modern day Danny Davis, a ref, and he becomes a heel ref, and then, he starts managing or being the second banana to Taya Valkyrie in some amazing skits. She, of course, is from Canada. But there's such a plethora of refs. I got to ride around a bit, like 4 or 5 car rides in the IWA mid-'70s with Tommy Young, who's like one of the premier legends. And today, if you look at New Japan, a lot of folks go, "Oh, Red Shoes the ref." That was our referee in LA, Red Shoes Johnny Dugan. That's where that came from. And so New Japan's Red Shoes is a big mark. Little off topic, but just some history on refs. And this guy was in a ton of movies like Mike Mazurki. He was a wrestler himself, and then he became a super famous ref like Evans, Dick Worley, and Dick Kroll in the Tri-WF, to where Inoki would bring Red Shoes Dugan in all the time for special huge matches. And also, that was my home base, LA territory, where Johnny Dugan ref for decades and was in quite a few movies. He was in the second Rocky movie. Anyway, we had some other refs, Hank Matheny and Jerry Murdoch, that were brought into All Japan by Bob at the same time. So he's bringing in. So these refs were big celebrities. And also, there were a lot of world-class champion boxers, Joe Louis and Jersey Joe Walcott, that were, refs in our era, Evans and mine. And even Pete Rose, his wife did a couple of sold shows in Ohio with the Sheik around 76, and had her husband Pete Rose, actually ref the main event with the Sheik against Luis Martinez. So, and last thing, very quickly, AEW is like my favorite promotion. I don't fast forward it, but they are getting knocks on lenient refs. Like if you've seen some of these refs that actually, when they're using a ladder in a match, they're actually holding it steady for the wrestlers. You can't do that. You're not supposed to be getting involved. And forget about 10 counts. They don't even, that's the whole thing, and the point of how incredibly important the refs are in your documentary, because you don't want to shit on the refs and have them look stupid and not do 10 counts. They'll let the out of the ring action go for 5, 6, 10 minutes. They don't even do a count. So it's like, so that's something great about all the folks that you interviewed, all the greats, from the top, Hebner to regular indie refs, is they are the true third person in the ring. They're vitally important. So I really enjoyed it, though. I thought you did a great job. I didn't know what I was expecting, but it was like when you don't know what you're going to see in terms of a movie's plot, and then it's wham, it hits you over the head. It was excellent. So great job, Colin. 5 stars.
Thank you. I was really going for the unexpected. I've seen most wrestling documentaries, and a lot of the time, especially nowadays, the dark side of the ring, and there's a lot of, grit and grime and death and drugs and rock and roll, and I just didn't. Wrestling isn't those things to me. Wrestling is a joyful thing. It's a celebratory, happy thing, and I wanted the movie to reflect that, and I wanted people who think they don't like wrestling to just give this documentary a chance, and maybe that'll get them to an indie show. Because I say to people, like, I dare you to go to an indie wrestling show and not have fun. If you don't have fun, I'll give you your money myself out of my own pocket. But it's impossible to not enjoy yourself at a good wrestling show.
Well, yeah,
And
I think what you said there is critical. A good wrestling show. And I've been to some
yeah,
indie shows that have been really badly put on, and they aren't
yeah,
enjoyable because they are, living, a shit show from like the very beginning of the opening bell to the after the 14th match,
yeah,
But
ends at
usually
like
it's not
2
the ref's
a.m.
fault. The ref's not booking it. So you have like sometimes an indulgent indie promoter. Like I love Dennis Coralluzzo to death, but he had like 4.5 hour shows. They got to be long, and every match, both heel and face might have their own seconds or managers, like young Chris Candido coming down with Popeye, his grandfather, who was a wrestler, as well as Tammy Sitch. Lots of valets and stuff. So sometimes it can be it feels more like a community, but the refs really are not at fault, and they usually don't get the effed up chance like in ECW. That was more the wrestlers when they screwed up a spot.
yeah. Well, I refereed 2 nights ago, and there was a kill the ref chant, and it was a women's match, and I hadn't done anything wrong except I counted to 2, and the heel kicked out, and everyone gets mad at me because they thought I was counting too slow, and so there's I'm supposed to no sell the crowd chants, but the heel wrestler Alexia Nicole from Toronto, she started to play into it. Oh, should I kill the ref? And so it's funny. There's a lot of debate there. How straight do I play it? Do I play it like I don't hear those chants? And a lot of times we base it on the show. If it's a serious death match show, then that's one thing. But if it's a bunch of kids at a fair, at a carnival, then you do something else. And so I sort of made a call. The crowd is chanting "kill the ref," and I just gave them a quick little shush. I just very quickly shushed them, like, cut that out. This is serious. Let's get back to business. But it's amazing how much discussion there is among refs. I didn't know this till I started making the movie, about all those subtleties about how lenient are you going to be? When will you be lenient? In which matches will you allow the heel to do a little bit more because it's a high stakes match and the fans want to see it and they paid their money, and when are you going to be tough enough with the rules that you're believable? And I even face I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3", and on the indie scene that makes me bigger than a lot of the wrestlers, which is not ideal for a ref. It's actually suboptimal. And so we talk about how my role as a ref, as a big guy, should be different than a small female ref or an older, more established ref in the way we carry ourselves. I can throw my weight around a little because I have a little weight to throw around. When it's a 110-pound ref against a 300-pound guy, there's no believability in that conflict. So they have to use their authority in a different way. And I had no idea the depth of to be honest, I watched wrestling my whole life, and only late in my, a few years ago did I think, the referees are kind of important too. And I think that's how most wrestling fans look at it. They know the referee's always there, and sometimes the referee's involved in a dirty finish or a controversial thing, but they're always part of the matches, but they're almost never discussed. But the matches could not happen without the referees. They are this sort of signposts and the voice of authority, and the sort of I always think they're sort of the envoy of the audience. A lot of shows, especially I think independent shows, there will be people there. They've never seen wrestling before. They've never been to a live show. All they know is that it's that stuff from TV with Hulk Hogan and the fighting, and so the referee, what I realize is their job is really important to letting that new fan know what is wrestling. Like, oh, a 3 count, that means a count of 3 means the match is over. Oh, I guess if they get tangled up in the ropes, they have a 5 count. But it's the referee who's telling that story, who's admonishing the heel, who's trying to not play favorites in the essentially you're part of the envoy to the audience saying, here's the rules of this bizarre universe you just stepped into. It operates sort of like our real world, but it has these interesting, idiosyncrasies that we tell on the fly by officiating them. I'm not taking over more credit than the referee deserves, because obviously the wrestlers put on the show and the referee is the supporting character. But it occurred to me, no one had ever. There's Oscars for supporting actor, but there's really nothing for the supporting character in wrestling aside from real nerds like us, talking about Tommy Young and Earl Hebner and and Red Shoes. So once I got into it and started to meet these people, I realized, there's not just a story of how you do refereeing. There's no one way to do refereeing in wrestling. There's this sort of sphere of possibilities, and it depends on what kind of show you're on and where on the show the match is. You don't want to just like the wrestlers, they want to build a crescendo. Well, there's something
Colin,
appreciating.
I've always said there is one particular standard you have to adhere to. And by the way, I was a heel manager, and nothing I enjoyed more than absolutely taunting the refs and just being as insulting to them personally. And then I'd have to go after the show and apologize to them. I'd say, I didn't know that Sears was handing out haircuts anytime soon, and I'd say, where'd you learn how to count, whatever local, elementary school there was. I'd say, where did you go to, did you flunk out of that, whatever local elementary school there was? But I've always said to refs, when I work with them, there is one standard that you've got to at least meet or exceed, and that's the Bronco Lubitsch standard. Okay? Did you study Bronco Lubitsch at all as a referee?
I was going to bring him up because he was big, because he was in his wrestling day in the 60s, like a 300 or 290
pound
guy.
But in the 80s and the 90s, he was so checked out that the minimum energy level for a referee.
Well, he was arthritic, and so I don't know if Colin's ever seen him. He did a 3 count with his foot once because
he put in as little energy as a human. It was almost Bodhisattva-like. If you are into meditation at all, he would just move his hand like this much, and with a disqualification, there'd be this much hand movement. And I say, if you can give a little bit more energy than Bronco Lubitsch, if you can pass that Bronco Lubitsch standard, you're okay as a ref. So
that's the thing about Johnny Red Shoes Dugan. He was well into his 70s, and he was still flying and diving. That's why he was in such demand, because no one had ever seen a ref this athletic, and he could take bumps. We had that sort of thing. I wanted to know, before I have to sign off, and let me bring this thing up about heel refs. The first guy to do it in the U.S., to my knowledge, was Roddy Piper, who had a quick tour. He was in our territory, my home base in L.A., and mid-'76, he debuted January 76 for us as a heel, and he went down to Mexico to CMLL, or it was then called EMLL, saw the heel ref thing, and he brought it up. So you want to talk about multitasking. He was our top promo guy, who Gene LaBelle worked with. He's wrestling. He's managing a stable of heels like Adrian Adonis, then using his real name, Keith Branks, I think was from Canada too, and doing heel reffing, where he was always screwing over the 3 Guerrero brothers. But in your excellent film, I got the feeling that you didn't come into the planning to be a ref. It just sort of happened at about 2/3 into the film. You start taking, the most treacherous flat back bumps and all kinds of other stuff. Was in making the film, did the idea for you to start reffing come at a later point, or was it there in the initiation of it or the pre-pro footage?
Yeah, the idea was there for me to try it. That was sort of I messaged the filmmaker, the director, Sarah, and she and I had a mutual best friend named Marshall, who unfortunately passed away during the making of the movie. He was the biggest wrestling fan I ever knew. But I had this. It just popped into my head one day. I said, what if I became a wrestling referee, figured out how to do that, and we made a documentary about it, but it was about the referee's job in general. And it's funny, it was just the timing and the circumstances. They just said, yeah, let's do that. Let's make that movie. But to do that, wrestling for me, I've watched it for as long as I can remember, and I get this idea in my late 40s that I want to become a referee and get in the ring. A wrestling ring to me, this may sound corny, but it's kind of like hallowed ground. That's where the pros do their thing, and I have no business in there. I'm not trained, at this age, what am I doing? And so I talked to a lot of refs before I even tried doing anything, before I got into a ring, and before we dared to buy a striped shirt. And I talked to a lot of wrestlers, and I really didn't. What I didn't want to do is take it lightly, because I respect the art form of it, and I didn't want to be seen as sort of just doing it for kicks. Every once in a while you see the local newscaster who decides to get chopped by a wrestler, body slammed by a wrestler, so they can say they did it. I didn't want to just like swoop in and try it for a couple of hours and then make a documentary about it. I started. The movie shows my very first match where with 5 seconds after the bell rings, I trip over a garbage can, almost fall on my face, and I'm humiliated. I'm clumsy. I'm the clumsiest person I know. I have no business with these athletes in there. But I've had to become more coordinated. I've had to become more athletic. I refereed a show.
You do, or you'll get potatoed.
Yeah. And, it's hard to keep up, even as a ref. Especially with the really athletic wrestlers. They move around, and man, I felt like I had been in a car accident after my first night of reffing, and after my first week, and I've had knee injuries, and it's a difficult thing, and I've had to up my own physical ability, but I've also had to really think about performance. My whole life, my adult life, I was a journalist. I was a newspaper reporter. So I was always the guy asking questions and writing someone else's stories. And then I was in communications and academia, behind the scenes, telling other people's stories. And then for the first time, now I'm the one in front of the camera, and it's my story that's being told through this wrestling documentary. And it's, I just felt like I wanted to do justice to pro wrestling, have fun with it. I've been doing Kayfabe news for 12 years, which is essentially poking fun at wrestling, but always from a place of warmth. We make fun because we love it.
I don't love 4-hour AEW shows. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
On a weekend of wrestling, it's a little too much to handle.
Sometimes I love the concept of wrestling more than I actually love watching the wrestling. I love the idea of wrestling, but I swear, I almost fell completely out of love with wrestling right during the lockdowns when they would televise wrestling in front of no fans, in front of digital
television
screens.
Sets.
Yeah, to me that's the antithesis of what wrestling is. Wrestling's the ultimate.
It was a very strange time.
They should have mic'd the each screen so you would hear each fan's voice.
But I just couldn't connect to wrestling that wasn't being performed for a live audience. To me, that's what wrestling is. Otherwise, to me, it's goofy. It's like ballet practice, It's just, it seems pointless. So I just couldn't bring myself to watch wrestling, really be interested in it for a while, which was a surprise for me. But getting into making this movie and actually getting in the ring and learning both that it's far more difficult than it looks, and it's far more, I hate to say it, there's even far more theatrical, I don't want to use the F word, the fakery. It's far more
illusionary.
Yeah, it's like a
magician.
And I love that. I love magic. I love, becoming a wrestling referee. Now I'm thinking, what else could I do that's sort of performative? Could I go into community theater? Or, I helped stage a concert the other night. It had nothing to do with wrestling. It was a fundraiser concert. But what I realized when I'm helping set it up was, oh wait, we're setting up for fans. We've got people at the door taking tickets. We've got gear being set up. This is an indie wrestling show, or
But
really
they
an
have a
indie
lot in
wrestling
common.
show.
They have a lot in
Yeah,
common.
it's a community, a small group of passionate performers. Of course, I'm talking about the indie level. WWE is an entirely different machine and everything on down. But wrestling is sort of, to me, in its purest form, is this like community theater. Sure,
Colin,
it's
would you say it's this? It's kids that are getting ready to grow up, and a lot of adults that refuse to grow up, and they're all gathered together at the same time for a common goal. Evan, do you have a
pretty much.
question for our guest?
Yes. Who was your all-time favorite referee? In the movie, you make it pretty clear Earl Hebner's number one, but all of a sudden you kind of shift and go Tommy Young's number one. So
Yeah.
I wasn't quite sure. So who's
Well,
your favorite?
So Earl's favorite was Tommy Young. My favorite, honestly, it was meeting Earl because partly because he's just, if you name a famous referee, I think he's at the top of the list because of the Montreal Screwjob. He's the one who smashed through the fourth wall, and suddenly the fans are seeing something they're not supposed to. So I really wanted to meet Earl, but not necessarily for that reason. It was because when I was a kid, I would go to the wrestling shows in London, Ontario, here in Canada, and I'd try to meet the wrestlers. I was a fan, and I had my pictures and my Sharpie, and what blew my mind, two things blew my mind. One was that Ric Flair was in a match, I think against Bret Hart, and I had front row tickets, and Earl Hebner was the referee, and he got into a shoving match with Ric Flair. And I thought in my brain, I was seeing the most incredible, one-of-a-kind thing. The referee has finally lost his patience with Ric Flair. I had no idea they did that 300 times a year. Not a clue. So in my mind, Earl Hebner was the brave referee who finally, in London, Ontario, stood up to Ric Flair. But I was also fascinated that same day, I went out back and I saw Jimmy Corderas, the other referee, getting into the ring truck and driving it away. And my illusion was exploded because I thought, well, Earl Hebner and Jimmy Corderas, they're clearly officials that are sent in from the World Refereeing Association, and they are clearly high-level people. What's he doing loading the ring truck? I don't get it. And that's the idea of this. There's an illusion to it, and I same with magic. I cannot watch a magic trick without then being obsessed with figuring out how it's done, and I go down rabbit holes to figure it out. When there's a show being put on and what's at face value is not exactly what's happening behind the scenes, like in wrestling or in magic, nothing can quench my curiosity about how it actually works. And I say in the movie, like, I spent my whole life trying to peek behind the curtain. Literally every wrestling show I'd go to, I'd wander off and try to look official, and even a 13 years old, look like I know what I'm doing. And of course I never get backstage. Someone kicks me out, but now I get backstage. I just refereed a match with Jay Lethal the other day, and Jack Vaughn and Gangrel and all, these people that I've watched, and now I'm reffing their matches. And
I worked a show with a couple shows with Gangrel. Nice guy.
Definitely. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, and
I've got to go. But I wanted to say very quickly, I co-interviewed a magician, and he's from Canada, Murray Sawchuk. This was like a global great magician. He said his crazy hair came from Phyllis Diller, but we were talking about the parallelisms, the Carney parallelisms between what he does, or at least entertaining, and he does illusions as a magician, and his love of pro wrestling as well. There are quite a few comedians like Jeffrey Ross, who Evan knows. But speaking of Evan and you, maybe your next project, I think it would be amazing after this one on refs, managers, dating back to Bobby Davis and Ernie Roth, who had so many personas, but ended up being the Abdullah Farouk and the Grand Wizard for the Sheik. And I don't know, I'm sure that Grand Wizard
If you do, don't leave out Buddy Sotelo.
That could
Don't
not
leave
fly
out Buddy
today.
Sotelo.
Pardon? Oh yeah, Buddy Sotelo. Yeah, I don't think that Grand Wizard name. Actually, it might. The way this country, our country, is leaning. So, more power to Canada. I'm sure you're going to see more Americans moving up there. And you guys have a great wrestling show. And hopefully, Evan gets some words in here.
Good night. See you next week.
Love the film.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
I'll tell you my greatest memory of a referee. 50 plus years of attending. My first match, June 74. So it's Superstar Billy Graham and Bruno for the belt. Graham's the champ. The guest ref is Gorilla Monsoon. You might have seen this video. So all of a sudden, Billy Graham goes like this. I quit. He goes back to the dressing room. Monsoon follows behind them. Next thing you know, Graham is on Monsoon's shoulders. Monsoon dumps him back into the ring, and it was like the Roman Colosseum. I'm sitting there as a kid, and it was like this bloodlust. I mean, Bruno pounces on him, and it was like an explosion. It was one of the most exciting moments I've ever seen as a fan, and the ref pulled it off. And back in those days, they would call them special guest referee enforcers, because they would have huge guys like Monsoon and Swede Hansen who were bigger than some of the wrestlers they were in with. And it had a whole different vibe to it. And inevitably, they were involved in the finish, and sometimes they were in the big match in the next show because they were part of the finish. And it really, really was special, those guest refs back then. And I mean, I'm talking about this almost 50 years later. And that was the greatest ref moment I can remember live. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you talk about like great ref moments, and one that it didn't even come up in the film. We just didn't have time to fit it in. But also with Earl Hebner, not only a great ref moment, but I think a great moment in television history was when suddenly there's two Hebners and they look alike. And
that was great.
One of them has screwed Hulk Hogan out of his belt, and they've been bought by the $1 Million Man. And maybe you guys knew that there were two Hebners, but I didn't, and I don't think most wrestling fans did. And what I still get, I actually have chills talking about it, just because what a perfect ruse to pull off on live TV in front of millions.
If people had known that there were two Hebners, they didn't really notice. I mean, the refs were so in the WWE out of the spotlight that you just never really paid attention to who was reffing. And that was like the first time that the ref became who the ref was became a consequence, a significant factor in the outcome of a title match. And that was genius, and really has never been done since.
Yeah, I've got to do a few on a much, much smaller scale on the independent level. I never ask to do a ref spot. As a referee, you're the lowest in the order, and I don't. I just
managers are not much higher up on the feeding chain.
That's true.
Let me just tell you that. Break that to you.
Yeah, I get that sense, but I just want to be on the show, and if I'll say yes to basically anything. And so there's times when these wrestlers, they'll come up with some ref spot, and sometimes it's a bump, and I'm old and brittle. I'm not going to do anything crazy, but a deathmatch wrestler, Madman Pondo, I was reffing one of his matches, and he did a big squish in the corner, where the wrestler moved out of the way, and I got squished, and he assured me before the match, you'll be fine, you won't feel a thing, and he's right. It looked great, but we had a blast doing it. And just when I'm only refereeing, like if it's a straight wrestling match and all I'm doing is counting pinfalls and rope breaks and all that, that's fun because I have the best seat in the house, and there really is not a better vantage point of a wrestling match than to be standing and moving around next to it so close that you can you can feel the sweat hitting your face. But when I'm actually involved in some sort of spot where I've been bribed, I've been chopped, and I've been skewered in the head with wooden skewers in a death match, and it's all of it has been a blast. Some of it isn't the most comfortable in the world, but these are people I trust to not kill me.
Yeah, but it is a lot more physical than a lot of people, and I think you do convey that very well in your film. That the amount that it requires a lot of actual training. People can't just walk in and be a ref, and that you really have to, communicate really well. I mean, I was trained as an emergency ref at Pro Wrestling Iron, just in case they needed me to do special referee training. And the wrestler who died recently, Max Justice, was doing a thing where he was on top of the guy with a headlock, and I was trying to count whether to see if the guy's shoulders were on the mat, and he swung. And I mean, the guy is built like a tank on top of a tank, and he swung his leg around and just clotheslined me with his leg, and literally knocked me halfway across the ring, and I was just like, blah. And so, it really, and the other thing too is like, have you had to do any battle royales?
So yes, I've refereed a battle royal, and I've actually been a participant in one.
Wow.
The gimmick was that all the wrestlers were being introduced into the battle royal, and then they introduced Kayfabe Colin, and I said, oh, no, I'm the referee. I'm not going in there. And I knew that I was going to, but the gimmick was that I had signed the wrong piece of paperwork or something, and so I had to go in. And there's one guy in this promotion who's just known for giving the most brutal, hard chops to the chest. And the shtick was he's going to get in the battle royal and then chop everybody, including me. But I had this great idea. I said, hey, I'm the referee. I'm not even a wrestler. What if I bribe you so you don't chop me and I leave the ring? And he goes, oh, that would be funny. But even funnier would be if you bribe me and I still chop you. And so sure enough, I gave him $20 and he chopped the crap out of me. And then I ejected myself from the battle royal. It was worth it. It was worth losing $20 and having a welt on my chest. But anyway, yes, battle royals are fun, and they can be quite chaotic. The referee's not in the ring for them, but there's so much going on that it really tests your ability to be
focused.
That hidden role of communication, and people get lost. They're not sure what's going on. You have to do a little bit of production. I did a 40-man battle royal, and nobody knew quite what was going on.
No, 40 man. I don't even know how how did the ring hold up with 40 people in it?
It took a beating. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, that was part of the problem. The other referee and I were running around when the wrestlers were down. We were telling them part of the ring was collapsing, so we were telling all of them secretly, avoid this part of the ring. You're going to turn your ankle. So it's stuff like that the fans don't see, and they're not supposed to. They shouldn't. If I do my job well, they had no idea that there was a problem with the ring. But me and the other ref, we had to tell the 30, 40 wrestlers about a ring that was about to fall apart underneath them. And thankfully it didn't. It didn't completely fall apart, but we were pushing it.
Well, another thing I wanted to ask you about, and I'm sorry to eat up your time, I mean, you can get some questions in, but I wanted to make sure I asked you a question about the music for the movie. Really exceptional. I mean, I like the rag. I'm a big fan of ragtime anyway. Although I think the intro song of The Ref Didn't See It is fantastic. That should be just a clip of that itself should be on YouTube so that people can see that and know that they should go watch the movie. But tell me how you found the band and how you integrated their music. What made you decide to make a lot of ragtime stuff as part of wrestling?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because there's a lot of thought that went into it. The easy answer is that I'm also a big fan of Dixieland and ragtime jazz. I fell into it. I started going to a live every Saturday in town. There was a live Dixieland jazz show where they'd play the old traditional New Orleans jazz. So I got hooked on that stuff. And I had this idea to make this wrestling documentary about the referees, and I told you I didn't want it to be sort of dark side of the ring. I didn't want it to be another sort of sad wrestling story, and so I wanted the music to have an upbeat feel, the way to convey that tone. And to me, there is no happier music, no more upbeat music than ragtime and Dixie. It's hard to not tap your toe along. I don't know anyone who says, ugh, I can't stand the sound of that music, right? If anything, people are indifferent. But it's hard not to love that New Orleans style jazz. So the jazz that you hear, the horns, the jazz band is a band called the Dixie Demons, based out of Toronto, and they were one of the bands I would see a few times a year at the jazz club. And then, as you know, as you've heard the song, it's not just Dixieland jazz. There's a turntablist sort of scratching and using samples, and it's a lot of samples of Gorilla Monsoon and JBL and Vince McMahon saying the ref didn't see it. So that is another just the director of this movie, Sarah Geidlinger, her previous movie was about hip hop music, and we got to know a DJ, a turntablist named Vekt, Vekked. He's the 7-time world DJ champion. So like there's a contest for everything, but there's a contest for turntablists to see who's the best scratcher and manipulator of beats. And this guy's won it 7 times. He happens to be from the same town as me. And so we got to know him. And so I had this idea. I didn't even know if it was conceivable, but I said to him, what if we took like Dixieland jazz and I found you like 25 samples of commentators saying stuff about the referee. Do you think you could turn it into something? And when he did, my mind was blown.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
That music is so much even better than I could have envisioned for it, and it really sets the tone for the film. And it just, I picked the clips. Again, I told you that in an indie wrestling show, the referee's job for some of the audience is to actually tell them how wrestling works, that 3 counts are a thing and 10 counts are a thing and rope breaks are a thing. I wanted that song to sort of tell the story for people who don't know what wrestling really is. So the samples are, if the referee didn't see it, he can't call it. And, oh, come on, ref, you're blind. He's cheating. And all these nuances that explain why the referee is an essential player in the show. So I'm glad you like the music, because I've heard that song 1,000 times and I still love it every single time.
It's excellent. And Evan had a great suggestion, and that is we could show your clip for the promo for the movie, if you don't mind. I would love to. Let me. One thing I'm always afraid to do is do sharing, because it always screws up. But I think I can get it here. So let me include sound here, and let's go with a clip. You guys see it? I hope you do. Great. Here we go.
Didn't see it. Referee doesn't see it. Come on, ref. The ref didn't see it. Referee's not seeing a damn thing. The ref didn't see it. The ref doesn't see it. The ref can't call it. Oh, it's true. That's the bottom line. You're only caught if the referee sees it. The referee didn't even realize what was done. Turn around, ref. Wake up. Nothing wrong with that if the ref don't see it. The referee didn't see that one either. Come on, ref. Do your job. The ref must not have seen it. The referee with no idea. You didn't know? It doesn't matter. Turn around, referee. Get your ass in there, you son of a bitch. You're only caught if the referee sees it. Can you dig it? The ref didn't see it. The referee doesn't see it. Come on, ref. The ref didn't see it. Referee's not seeing a damn thing. The ref didn't see it. Turn around, referee. The ref doesn't see it. The ref can't call it. That's the bottom line, sucker. Woo! Yeah.
be sitting in the front row, and I'll give you crap like you gave me when you were a kid.
I did give you crap.
Oh,
I gave you a lot of crap.
did.
Come on, ref, he's cheating.
Yeah.
I was so mad at you.
Oh, see, I'll chew your ass out like you did mine.
Okay, fine.
Good luck.
That's
There
an
we go.
excellent trailer. Excellent. It really
Thank you.
captures it.
Yes, and you know, I also wanted to ask you a little bit about working with the ref, who's missing the legs, you know, and where did you find him? How did you you know get in touch with him and get him to be part of the movie?
Yeah, so his name is Cameron Adamson, and I think it was just as the lockdowns for COVID were easing up, and I think wrestling, and I may have the timing wrong, but I was at an indie wrestling show just as a fan, well before I had this, years before I had this idea, and I was just watching my local indie wrestling show, and it was about 3 matches in before I was like, hang on a second, the referee doesn't have any legs, and it took me that long because he's that good. And the wrestlers are good too. Obviously, they take some credit for keeping my attention. But I didn't meet him that night. I was just sort of amazed. I contacted the promoter and I said, "Who's that referee?" And he introduced me. And so it was, you know, at Border City Wrestling, which is Scott Demore had started up in like Detroit and Windsor area, where I went up and met with Cameron, and sure enough, you know, what I hope the movie conveys is that he's an indie wrestling superhero, and that he's not just the referee. Like, he's really working harder than anybody else. He's setting up the ring, tightening the ropes, doing all this stuff, either in his wheelchair or just walking around on his hands. And he's just so grateful to be part of it, and he gets it. Like, he knows he's not the star, and he, you know, Cody Deaner says in the movie, like, it's hard enough for a referee to go unnoticed, but when the referee has no legs, you'd think that would be the first thing that everybody notices. But he's really good at it. I admire him a lot, and so does everybody around him. You know, Tommy Dreamer said, "I wish we had 1,000 of him," and it really is impressive. He's just he's so uninterested in the fact that he doesn't have legs. It's kind of like, yeah, big deal. Whatever. I still get to be involved in wrestling, and that's what he loves. That, and he's a Freemason, and he's deeply involved in his the Masonic Lodge in Windsor, and we got to film there too. So yeah, he's amazing.
So I want. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Evan.
I was just going to say, we've been on almost 45 minutes, and everything you've said has been wildly positive. You love wrestling. You used the word warm. You referred to Cameron as a superhero. Yet, every day in the IWC, Internet Wrestling Community or whatnot, I see wrestling fans spewing venom at each other. You know, guy wakes up in the morning, he's a soldier, WWE soldier attacking Tony Khan, and, you know, just, I don't get it. I mean, we could be on the brink of World War III now with the Middle East, you know, bombing each other. These guys are worried about Tony Khan. I mean,
I know.
I don't get it. What do you think, Colin?
I've seen it, and to some degree, I've been part of it. You know, I did. I've been writing Kayfabe News, which is, you know, satire of wrestling. So I've been a member of that internet wrestling community thing, a part of the noise. But I've always tried to, you know, my satire, I always tried to keep it non-malicious, and it was always about the fictional characters. And I've been told that in the writers' room at WWE, I know some former writers who said they appreciated that I was poking fun at their product, but it was done without a malicious intent. And it was usually, I'd use WWE to satirize something else, you know, something.
Yeah, but you're
absurd about-
Canadian. You can't be mean. You're
Yeah,
Canadian,
yeah.
so you can't
Yeah.
do anything with an edge.
Yeah, it feels a bit unpatriotic, but yeah, you know, I always hear grizzled veterans say, "Oh, it's such a dirty business, and everyone's a backstabber, and blah blah blah." I sense a lot of um, there's negativity out there among the fans and among the wrestlers, but there's also a ton of positivity, and I'm I'm determined to not engage with the negativity. I don't play those games, even if there's rival factions of indie groups, and so doesn't talk to so, and I don't play those. I go to all the shows and I shake everyone's hand because I want it's such a subculture within a subculture. Wrestling, we talk about it so passionately, but for most people out in the real world, it's such a bizarre black box, right? And so it drives me a little crazy that within this subculture, there's all this infighting. And I can understand a little bit with real sports, I can barely understand with that, like with football or hockey or soccer or basketball, where you've got your local tribe, your local team, and you're going to support your local team no matter what, or your favorite team. But in wrestling, the outcomes truly do not matter, and they have nothing to do with how loud. Well, that's not true. They do have something to do with how loud you're cheering or booing, because that's what the promoters notice. But I don't understand. You wouldn't. I keep making with independent wrestling. I keep making the comparisons to community theater, but you don't go online and see all these fans of community theater attacking the guy who leads one community theater and wishing failure upon them. I don't quite. I did a Kayfabe news story once. It said something like world's biggest wrestling fan wishes failure upon all promotions. This idea that the bigger the fan you are, the more you hate everything about the product. I did a story with the headline, "The wrestling fan bemoans the current product for 27th consecutive year." It gets old. The constant, if it drives you that crazy, then find a different pastime. To go back to your question, the negativity that can surround wrestling, I think when you get really down to it, and it's a bunch of people putting on a wrestling show in an arena for a bunch of fans, if you strip away all the $10,000 per ticket, I don't know what WWE is charging, all the extra stuff that's built onto wrestling, if you strip it down to some people in a ring putting on a show for a live audience like that, every time I go to a show, all I see is happiness. I don't see anyone leaving unhappy because their guy lost. It really doesn't matter. Everyone's walking out saying that was fun. And whenever I referee a show, my family will say the next day, "Oh, how did it go?" And I'll usually say, if all goes well, I'll say everyone had fun and nobody got hurt. And that's a win for me. We want to make it look like everybody got hurt. But
we'll asterisk on that one. Most of the people got paid.
Yeah.
But I've never been to an indie show where everybody got paid, where everybody made money and everybody got paid. So you can say the majority of the people who did the hardest work got paid. Okay, if you can say that, then you can say that was a good show. Not all the shows work out that way.
I've learned that sometimes a guy comes by with an envelope, and sometimes he doesn't. And sometimes I go home without one, and I don't complain because, at this I am
it's
doing
not your day job. It's not your day job. So, but I did want to ask you a couple questions about Kayfabe News, since we have only a few minutes left, and it's such a major part of who you are and what you do. As much as I loved The Ref Didn't See It, I would be a short shrift if we didn't talk a little bit about Kayfabe News. And you did just mention it there, but just tell me a little bit about the origins of it, how it got started, and then how did it get to the momentum to be such a huge entity that it is today?
Well, it, like most things, it just started with an idea popping into my head, and like 99% of them that are crap, this one kind of had some merit to it. But it partly came, so I was a newspaper reporter in my day job, so I had this sort of journalistic writing thing down pat. You know, the style of writing that the Onion does or that Kayfabe News does is a very deadpan journalistic style. That's kind of part of the joke, is that I'm reporting with a seriousness about stuff that has no seriousness. And so I actually, it was after seeing Mick Foley. He did he came through on one of his comedy spoken word tours, and I forced myself up to chat with him and have dinner with him and some of the comics, and sort of hatched this idea of doing a wrestling version of the Onion, basically, because I had actually been writing for Pro Wrestling Illustrated and the other After mags as well. I had happened upon an opportunity to do that, and for 6 or 7 years I was a regular contributor to the After mags, which they're written in that kayfabe style as well. They're written especially traditionally in that we are the Sports Illustrated of this sport. It's written about with a very serious journalistic tone. So I sort of had this background in writing about wrestling and writing in the kayfabe style. The After mags, even I was a little bit naive when I first started writing for them. I didn't quite realize that their journalism is sometimes elaborated fictions. The interviews I was doing with wrestlers didn't actually happen, but that goes back to the long-standing agreement with the magazines that as long as you're playing along with the storylines and helping the product, then. So I had been writing PWI magazine articles and serious journalism. I was a fan of the Onion, and I just combined these things and launched a website, 13 years ago, just mainly hoping to entertain my dad and a couple of friends and myself. And but I sort of developed a knack for it and a voice and then an audience. And I challenged myself to try to write one article every day, which sometimes I succeeded and sometimes I didn't. But now it's been like 3,600 some odd articles, and many of them, like the normal news in the world, they're very of their moment. Charlotte Flair said something crazy one day, so I poked fun of it, and that sort of, it's very short-lived. But I've tried to write a lot of these articles to be sort of evergreen. They're really about wrestling in the bigger picture. They're about wrestling fandom, or like the tropes of wrestling, the absurdities that are sort of built into it. So I've collected all of those, the more evergreen articles, and I'm hoping to publish a book of them pretty soon. I've compiled them into a book, and I've got a couple people to write some
When that
forwards.
when that book is ready, come on back on the show. We will absolutely promote the heck out of it, because this show was kind of invented to get people like you on it, to find the inner workings of things like this. I've always said I wanted this show to be like inside the actor's studio, but in a wrestling sense.
Yep.
And I really appreciate that. I want to, and I know we're running out of time, but let me see if Evan's got another question, then I'll hit you with a deeper question after that. Evan,
you're assuming your question is deeper than my question. I'm joking. So, Colin,
I want the deepest question possible.
As somebody who has worked on multiple films, including 350 Days, which took 6 years to do, I know the process is not easy in doing a documentary. And you are one of the very, very few wrestling documentaries that is really a special film, because it's not only informative, it's warm and it's funny. And that's not an easy balance in any film. So my question would be, do you have any future aspirations for more films? And it doesn't necessarily have to be wrestling, because you pulled it off with this. There's some wrestling documentaries that are horrible. I mean, you can't see it. It's like it's filmed in the dark. You can't hear it. Basics. So,
Yeah.
do you have future aspirations in film?
Actually, yes. We're working on the same director that I worked on with this one, Sarah Geidlinger. She and I are working on a movie. It has nothing to do with wrestling. It couldn't be more different. It's called The Lullaby Project. And get this, there's three singer-songwriters, musicians, who go into a women's prison and they write songs with these mothers who are incarcerated for whatever reason, because these mothers, their children aren't, they can't see their children. They're on the outside of the prison. So they write lullabies for these children and record them and then play them for the kids. And it's this beautiful way to connect mothers to children who are separated. It couldn't be more different than wrestling,
Sounds amazing, though. Sounds amazing.
Except that observation I had the other night when we were setting up a fundraising concert for this project. And I realized it has all the same elements of a wrestling show. It has talented people who practice their craft. It has support staff. It has AV and tech and an audience and a flow and a dynamic. You know, every wrestling show has a crescendo, right? And that's why we've all been to a show that goes on too long and starts to bottom out. So all of these factors, I don't think I appreciated about pro wrestling until I was part of it. That what happens between the two wrestlers in the ring is the exciting part, but to make that happen and to create the illusion that this is a prize fight or whatever, you know, it's sort of a cliche, but it takes a village. It takes practically the whole locker room plus all these unseen people in the background to pull off a good wrestling show. And I've just begun to appreciate that. My whole life it was sort of a closed off culture. You know, wrestling is not so much anymore, but it was a notoriously closed door business. And I just thought it was that way because all the people in it were jerks. But what I've realized is once you're in that community, it's a very sort of respectful community based on, you know, cooperation and a mutual passion for what they do. And it's still
paying your dues.
Yeah, and I just find it, you know, Bret Hart had this line in his book that any idiot can hurt somebody, but there's something beautiful about two people creating the illusion of hurting each other, but not actually doing so. And the more the movie's done, I don't have to keep reffing for the movie, but I'm doing it because I love it. And it's that part of it that I love, is that these are the best wrestling matches that look like the most intense fights are actually the ones where two people are gelling in the most, I think, beautiful way, right? They're in sync like dancers. And
it's like Swerve Strickland against Ospreay. That match that just happened. You know, I watched it over the week, and I just wanted to say you've been absolutely amazing as a guest for us this week. I just wanted to ask what your immediate future in wrestling is, and you sort of answered it a little bit. It seemed to me like this wasn't a one-off. This is something that you want to continue doing.
Yeah.
And what feds are you currently repping at, and if you want to give them a plug?
Yeah, so my home base is called Off the Ropes Studio. That's where I did my training, and they put on shows, you know, all around the area where I live, within a couple of hours drive in any direction. I've probably done almost 100 matches. I think I'm about to do my 100th this coming weekend, which is, you know, I talked to other refs on the scene who now they're getting ready for their 1,000th or their 3,000th match, and I'm sure that I will never quite feel like I've gotten there. Those guys
are a lot. 100's a pretty good number.
Yeah, and everyone is, you know, everyone's a learning experience. So in wrestling, I definitely want to continue refereeing, but I do have some project. It's premature to talk about other creative, fun wrestling projects I'm working on, but if they come to fruition, you'll hear about them first. At the moment, I have that non-wrestling to work on, but there's a real appetite, I think, we know there's an appetite among wrestling fans for wrestling documentaries and wrestling. There's some fans will just gobble up anything, but I think wrestling's having a bit of one of its mainstream moments where there's an openness to it. You know, it's on Netflix, and The Rock is an international star, and I think wrestling there's a it's opening itself up, I think, to a broader audience, and it's a good time to sort of explore and maybe reshape what wrestling is. You know,
Your documentary helps that. Your
Thank
documentary really helps do that, and I think we all were very impressed with it, and we want to really help spread the word. And I was just telling another person about it before before we were connecting here. I said, "Oh, I got this guy on the show, and you've got to see his documentary. The Ref didn't see it because he's also a big wrestling fan, and so
amazing.
I'm doing what I can to make people know about it and spread the word, and hopefully the show gets you a few more fans as well. So we're hoping for that.
I'd be in very serious trouble with the director if I didn't mention it's available at therefmovie.com. Yeah, that's where people can find it now, and we're hoping to get it some film festivals, and ideally, maybe at a wrestling convention or a cauliflower alley, places where
Be great
where
at Cauliflower Alley.
wrestling nerds like us congregate.
So how would fans get a hold of you if they're interested in getting in touch with you at social media?
Yeah, mostly at Kayfabe News on Facebook and Twitter. It's still where to find me. And at therefmovie.com, they can find the movie there. The trailer is there, and I'm available. I'm reachable there too.
Great.
And if promoters want to book me to be a ref, then I'm all for it. It's so fun.
That's great. Hey, Evan, why don't you give a plug for your book real quick?
Okay, right behind me, wrestling rings, blackboards, and movie sets, 100 plus stories from the heart. And I just started a new Facebook page. It's called From the Art House to the Grindhouse, movie reviews, mini movie reviews. It's, short and sweet. Do you want to check this movie out or not? And it's everything from the worst movies ever made to the British Film Institute's top 100 greatest movies ever made, because I like it all.
You're a great movie reviewer, so yeah, people should check that out.
Thank you. And then that's pretty much it. Senior editor over ProWrestlingStories.com, and check out, of course, 350 Days, Wrestling Then and Now documentary. Colin, we did Wrestling Then and Now in 2002 on about $1,000. Yeah, I mean, just total guerrilla filmmaking. We just rolled into like Nikolai Volkov's place, and like friends. It means a lot to me. Here's another thing with documentaries. I'll make it real quick. Almost 25 years later, most of the people in that film are dead. So it's great to honor your friends, because 25 years from now, unfortunately, some of the people in Colin's movie will be gone, but they'll be there forever in the Ref Didn't See It.
Well, hopefully Colin is still with us. That's the key thing here.
Well, during the making of the movie, we lost one of our co-filmmakers.
There you go. Yeah.
And also Kevin Sullivan, about 2 weeks after a few weeks after we interviewed him, he passed away. And we were at the same convention where Bushwhacker Butch passed away, and we were hoping to chat with him. So yeah, life is precarious, and if you can document, this movie, it's a document about the referees and everything, but personally for me, it's a document of a couple years of my life, and a couple very eventful, fun years when I got to live my childhood dream of being in a wrestling ring. So above all the other things, it's just like, I'm so happy to have this document of me with all these people that I admire and have watched on TV.
And because it's a quality film, 100 years from now, people will watch it when these people are gone. No, absolutely. So
I hope they do.
Thank you.
Well, anyway, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. We'll be thrilled to have you on as a guest again for any of your projects, even the one about the lullabies. We'd be happy to, this could have been a 4-hour show, Colin, very easily. And I mean,
I can talk about wrestling for longer than that.
Exactly. So we'll save it for another show, but thank you so much for being here tonight. Good night, everyone. We'll see y'all next week. That's